Welcome, everyone, to another Love Ignites Peace book club podcast. This month, we read the book, The Soul of Money by Lynne Twist. And this book really rocked my world. So I can't wait to hear what everyone else on this podcast thought about the book. But before we get to that, we missed you, Teresa, last month. We're so glad to have you back.
Nice to be back. Thank you.
Does anyone have any coincidences, any God winks, anything they want to share before we get started?
So I thought there was one in the book that I really think is worth a read, since we always talk about coincidences. And it was talking about collaboration, creating prosperity. It was chapter 7, page 144. And so I'm just going to read that really fast. It was a Friday night. I had been in a meeting all day and was exhausted. I was on my way home from Sarasota to San Francisco when the brakes of my car began to fail a few blocks from the Golden Gate Bridge. I pulled into the nearest gas station. The fellow there couldn't fix the brakes, but he pointed me in the direction of an auto repair garage down the street. I drove at a crawl without brakes, the short distance, but as I rolled up to the front garage, I could see I was out of luck. It was after 7 o'clock. The garage doors were closed and the office light was off. But a soft light shone through the garage door windows, and desperate as I was, I went over and peeked in, hoping to find a merciful mechanic. Instead, I saw a party of 30 or 40 people in progress. All the automotive equipment had been pushed aside, and in the center was a bare concrete floor surrounded by party lights and decorations, and a sleek, shiny grand piano. The party was going strong, but the piano sat silent. I ventured in, found the garage owner, a man named Rico, champagne glass in hand, and asked if anyone might be able to help me. I explained my problem. "I'll pay you anything to fix my brakes so I can get home," I said. Rico laughed and said, "No way, lady, we're having a party and we're in full swing." But then he jokingly said, "Our piano player is a no-show though, and if you can play the piano, we'll fix your car." Everyone laughed, but as it happens, I do play piano, and that is what I did. I played for their party for nearly an hour, and surrounded by these people laughing and singing and dancing, the mechanic cheerfully fixed my brakes. When the job was done, they sent me on my way, refusing any payment and toasting our new friendship. I drove home safely, no longer tired and exhausted, but exhilarated and energized. I had showed up with exactly what they needed, and they had provided exactly what I needed. Our encounter was filled with the delight of serendipity and the satisfaction of having been able to perfectly help one another. I just loved that coincidence, and I thought it was a good energy to start the podcast off with.
Now that you're rereading it, I do remember it, but if you would have asked me that earlier, I'm like, what? Did I skip that whole chapter or something?
It was just a blip and not really essential to the story, but I was like, gosh, like another beautiful coincidence and all that we read, another synchronicity.
And those things happen all the time. And it's just all of us getting used to it and building that muscle.
It's just very cool because it is really a living in the flow moment and another universe has your back moment for sure.
Yeah.
Does anyone have anything else to share before we get started?
Well, I just had a phone call right about 6:30, 6:40 before this podcast from my son, RJ. It warms a mother's heart, or even when our friends get it. He literally woke up with an intention that he needed to go to work and clear his new office. And when he got there, he asked HR, would that be a problem? They said no. And then when he got there, he did his room and he sent out a quick text to the 8 offices around him and asked, would they like their offices cleared while he was there?
Is this with like sage?
Yes, the whole thing with a lighter. And that's why he asked HR. He wanted to make sure, So he did. All 8 of them said yes. And literally within less than an hour, the new, I don't know if he has a title, but the new head of GameStop in that area, he's very new, called and sent all 8 of those people, not the whole everybody, just RJ and the 8 of the offices he cleared the space, and invited them in for a meeting and all that transpired after that. So my point being, RJ, with intent and trust from everything he's learned, created magic in his work environment. he was blown away. He's like, Mom, I said, well, that's what happens when we trust and we act with passion and intent. So that wasn't really for me, but it was just a warm heart that people do listen. People do listen. So that's mine.
I love it.
I love that. That's
cool.
Incredible. I have one about work as well that's following up from our last podcast where we talked about Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza. So I shared with the podcast that I did that activity of putting my intention, writing down everything that I wanted to achieve. So my particular realm that I wrote down was the same as the example he used in the book, which was around my job. And I wrote down all of the things I wanted and all of the ways I wanted to feel. And I did this with the intention of thinking that I was ready for a new position or a new opportunity. And what I had shared last time was after writing that down, so many things had changed at my current job that just made it so much better. And since then, I had my yearly review with my company. And one of the things that I wrote down was very specifically like a percentage of money increase that I wanted. And I was like, the company I'm at now is just, they're not going to do this. Like, it's just not going to happen. I'm going to, in conjunction, it wasn't just about money, but that was just one of the things on there. And I wrote down a bunch of ways that I wanted to feel. And sure enough, my yearly review came around and I got a huge bonus and not a promotion, but a raise that I was not expecting. I was expecting to get like a bump for, cost of living increase that they do every year. But I've only been at this job for a year. So this was my first review. And I basically got way more than I was expecting. And moreover than that, like way more than the money is just the way I have felt and the things that have transpired at work that are literally the manifestation of this exercise and me willing it to happen and meditating in and just being open to whatever that possibility looked like. And I feel so many of the ways that I wrote down on the list I wanted to feel. I feel so much more creative. I feel so much more autonomous. The president of the company is like coming up to me a lot more and asking me what like my feedback on things and genuinely wanting to hear from me. Like people are talking to me like I'm their peers. It's just been really, really cool. And then the other day, my boyfriend was listening to a podcast and he's like, there's this guy on this podcast. It's something Dispenza something. I was like, Martin, this is the book I was just reading. And he's like, what? And then we found out that he lives in San Diego or does work in San Diego, which I don't know why I didn't know that. And Martin's talking about like going to one of his retreats or something. So it's just been really cool. That has been a full circle thing from last podcast.
That's awesome.
Congratulations, Jenna. And the message I want to convey is to the listeners is read these books.
Yeah.
The books that we are reading are like changing lives, for the better.
Well, everything works if you work everything. You have to work and do it, and it will happen. It's awesome.
Well, let's get started and jump right in. As I had mentioned, the book that we read this time was The Soul of Money by Lynne Twist. And this is actually, I would have to look, I'm not sure the exact year that this was published, but this has been out for quite a few years. And the relevance of when this book was actually published for the first time is just as powerful today, I think, as it was then.
Mm-hmm.
So here is the quick summary of the book, The Soul of Money by Lynne Twist. Takes us on a journey that examines our attitudes toward money, how earning it, spending it, and giving it away offers surprising insight into our personal lives. Through personal stories that range from a private audience with Mother Teresa, walking through the most impoverished country in the world, India, with Gandhi's fifth son, all the way to working with some of the world's most successful CEOs, Lynne shares practical advice from what she has learned. She asks us to discover our relationship with money, understand how we use it, and by accessing our core human values, align our relationship with it and our desired goals. Whether you have a little or a lot of money, there are lessons to be learned. This book about living consciously, fully, and joyfully in our relationship with money and learning to understand and embrace its flow. In doing so, we can transform our lives. So what were your overall thoughts? Did you like the book?
Loved the book. Loved it.
Lisa, I think this might be your most glowing review so far.
Oh, well, and partly because I had never read this book before. So, and some of our other book clubs, things I had already done much of. This one, just her personal story and her personal journey, how it shifted her outlook to her husband and their friends, just everything became so powerful in the message. And I loved it. I loved her energy and all the stories. It was an incredible book of the world, really. She took us around the world. I just loved it.
I also loved it. I love reading books that are, like you said, it's worldly. She took us all over the world. So it was like a study in sociology as well as human psychology. So I also love that, just taking you from people that had absolutely nothing to people that had everything, and just seeing how beliefs about money played into their lives, regardless of what we consider lack or abundance. So it was pretty amazing. So I enjoyed it very much.
I loved it too. This one got a glowing review from everyone. I actually finally took notes because I realized that I'll forget a lot of things. I'll draw chicken scratches and then forget to find it. But I literally wrote "loved!" ! The worldly aspect was awesome. I also really liked that it showed both of the sides of money. So again, that perspective of having a lot and a little. And I think a lot of the literature on money is about how to make money, how to get money, how to get rich, and this is all about the energy of money and money not being a good or bad thing. It's just a thing. The way you channel it is what gives it good or bad energy. And that was really, really profound to me. And also the principle of scarcity, that the principle of scarcity is a lie, basically, I thought was really powerful. There's more than enough to go around. It's about it being allocated and us choosing to use that energy through money for good.
I very much enjoyed it and agree with everything that has been said so far. One thing I will add to that is I think it was one of those books that will connect with so many people because it also uses hard data and truly experience from someone that has, as my mom read in the introduction, had a private audience with Mother Teresa, walked with the son of Gandhi, worked with some of the biggest billionaires at Microsoft. This woman has the experience. She's seen, again, the poorest of poor and the richest of rich. And I think it gives a lot of credibility to the principles found in this book, as well as the stories and just all the takeaways. So I'm a big fan.
I think what, on your note, what gave it a lot of credibility was her and her husband's conversation of their life, how personally they were caught in the money trap of keeping up with the, quote, the Joneses, where their friends were. But they turned their life and made their life different, and they started walking the talk. And that, for me, is what gave credibility to the whole book.
I really like that.
I really enjoyed the book too. And the title of the book is The Soul of Money. And I really think that she connected this idea of money with how we can use that energy or channel that energy, like Jenna said, from the authenticity of our soul. And money can really create great purpose in our lives and help us live our passions instead of just being this vehicle that just helps us get more and more and more.
This took me by surprise too, I will say, from the title. I mean, that holds a lot of weight. The soul of money, two things that I at least would have previously associated with being really contradictory to one another. And this book was not at all what I was expecting it to be. I thought it was going to be one of those books about kind of like manifesting more. And I love how it wasn't about that. It was about manifesting more in terms of what we get out of money and using it for good, but it wasn't manifesting more in terms of like more for you. And so you can have your piece of the pie and your share, or it really took me by surprise. And I thought it was very beautiful and profound, as I said.
I want to just tag off of what Jenna just said, and one of my favorite quotes from the book that I think holds so much power beyond money and just emphasizes everything that we do in Love Ignites Peace. It's the great futurist and scientist Willis Harman said, "Society gives legitimacy and society takes it away." And this whole book was really about that. It was like giving legitimacy and taking it away from things that do not serve us and do not serve our collective as a society. And so to your point, even with scarcity, reevaluating that perspective, or sufficiency, or even the fact that money could have a soul, that you said that, gosh, that feels contradictory. You know, you're taking away a belief that was once held and replacing it with one that is more in support of the world that you'd like to create. So I just loved that.
Okay, on to the next question. And we've kind of danced around, I think, some of this already, but what was your most profound and important takeaway from this book?
Well, I'll jump in. I recapped it the other night. It was towards the end of the book. And it was when and right now I apologize, I can't remember the country. But when she got there, there were women, a group of women. And these groups of women had no value, I guess is a good word, in their society and community. But secretly, they were, correct me if help me out, Noelle, because I know you know what I'm talking about. They would have to kill their children because they didn't have the money to take care of them, or am I that part?
It was a dowry.
Yes.
It was because boys are valued in our society, girls are not. So they would
Infanticide. Yeah.
Right.
And they knew from the birth of the baby that the dowry that would be expected to be paid would bankrupt the whole family.
Exactly.
So they would effectively kill them.
But those women got together and in humble, intentful privacy went into the forest and they prayed for change. They set an energetic intent in motion for change. And that I just love, when people can come together, mind, body, and soul, and create a change. I thought that was just to live in something so horrific and sad. It was in their cells for generations. They decided they can chant and come together as women and make change. I loved that part so much. So that was mine.
There's actually a little bit more to that story, and I'm just going to say, hang on, listeners, because one of our next questions is to share one of our favorite stories, and I'm going to tag off of what the story that Teresa just told and finish that story because it has an unusual twist to its ending. But let me jump in real quick. I'll just share my takeaways real quick. The one thing that I thought was so powerful, and we've already kind of mentioned this, is this idea that scarcity is a myth, that really scarcity is a human-made program that we've let guide how we've interacted with money and with each other. And the reality is that if you look to nature and you look to just how things work on this planet, there's always enough. There's always enough for everyone. So this idea of scarcity being a myth and sufficiency being the truth, there's always enough that we can sufficiently take care of our needs, really was a beautiful, beautiful way that she wrote about the energy of money, I thought. And then something else that I thought was really kind of fun, she was having dinner with Buckminster Fuller. And some of us on this podcast are familiar with Buckminster Fuller, who was a philosopher, basically. And she was having dinner with him, and he talked about this idea of we need to change the consciousness from you or me to you and me. And when we change that consciousness to you and me, then we really incite this energy of collaboration. And that isn't anything earth-shattering. I think we already know that, but it was such a great reminder in just even how we think, how we talk, the energy that we want to bring to our, not only our relationships, but to our society as a whole. And this idea of how can we use our money in this you and me approach, where there is always enough to really create this incredible life for as many people on this planet as we possibly can.
Mine was this idea, the idea that money is energy and that it flows like water. It ties back to the lack of scarcity principle, or the fact that that's a myth, and just the idea that money comes and it goes. We get so anxious and worried about, when is the money coming? Oh no, it's going. I thought one of the stories, which this isn't the story that I picked, but so I can tell it now, but she talked about when the stock market crashed one of the times, and she and her husband effectively lost a ton of money, and their attitude towards it, I think, was really, really incredible, because that is a stressful thing. I mean, you see, who knows what they're saving for? Kids' college, their future, their retirement. They lost a bunch of money and they completely shifted their attitude. And the end result was that they didn't really ever get that money back, but they changed their attitude towards appreciating the things that they do have and the abundance in their life, and just more of this attitude of like, that money comes and money goes. And I think this is a core value that I think I've always had. My parents kind of raised me like this, but it was a really good reminder, because Paige, you said earlier that this book was written a while ago, I think the early 2000s, but it still holds value today. I would say this holds more value than the year that it was written, because our consumer society is just out of control. And that's a huge part of the way that we live, and it becomes ever more so every year. But just this idea that how you spend reflects your deepest values, and looking at how you spend and making sure that it's consistent with what your values are. I think that that's a really good reminder, and I try to live that way, but it's like a good reminder where it's like, not that you can't indulge and have nice things. And I think that's a value too, self-care, and that's a whole other story. But just this idea that I think there are times where we all, myself included, have spent frivolously in a way that didn't actually end up feeling good and wasn't necessarily consistent with my values, that I could have gone without or could have done something else with that would have been more nourishing, felt better, helped somebody, done more good than what it did for me. And I think that that was a really good reminder to just like check in with yourself and course correct during those times where you maybe feel like you're not necessarily spending in line with those values, and you can always kind of redirect that flow.
And I was going to say, you guys have touched on a lot of my big takeaways as well. But I also, just that reminder that our relationship with money, from scarcity to sufficiency, from complaint to commitment, from envy to gratitude. So when we move to those more powerful ways of connecting with money, it's just a flow of energy, how much that can impact our lives.
We've kind of touched on this over and over, but was saying it in a different way. I think one of the huge takeaways for me from this book was just the power of you as an individual. I think so often we underestimate how powerful our dollar is, our vote of that, or how powerful even giving a little can be if it's done with the right intention, or just all of these things that she talked about, being a conscious consumer. Are you buying from places that support your values? Like, it just all goes together. And I'm just the resident book reader here, apparently. I love to read some of the quotes. And one of the quotes that I underlined and then said, wow, was, according to the Giving USA annual report on philanthropy, in the year 2000, more than $200 billion was given to the not-for-profit sector. And of that 200 billion, over only 5% came from corporations, 7% came from foundations, 88% came from individuals. So the bulk of the giving and generosity comes from individuals. And of those people who give 88% of the money, 75% of them make less than $150,000 a year. And again, this book covers the power of you as an individual with money, setting intention, creating appreciation, being in collaboration, beyond what I just read. But just take that as an affirmation to those listening, like, you have power. Your money, your intent behind your money, it can change the world. It does change the world. And that goes with what we talk about so often with Love Ignites Peace, change your vibe or change your frequency, change the world. But this is the same thing, right? You're changing your frequency, your interaction with money, and you're changing the world with it. With that said, Jenna shared my favorite story. So let's go on to the next question if we're all ready. What's a story from the book that impacted you the most?
Well, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and start because I want to finish tagging off the story that Teresa was telling about the women in India who had been forced to kill their girl babies when they were born. And as Lynne, the author, was meeting with this group of women, they were saying how powerful it was to actually give voice to what had happened. And then they asked Lynne, what would you change if you could change one thing? And I don't think Lynne had an answer in the moment. So after she had met with this group of women in India, she flew back home to California, and she and her husband were having dinner that night with a Hollywood producer, I guess. And the producer had just released a movie which was very violent. And as she was flying home, she was having these thoughts. What would I change? What would I change? And one of the things that she was thinking about was, oh my gosh, I really don't think we need to be putting out movies that are so violent and perpetuating this kind of energy. So here she ends up at dinner with a producer who has just put out the movie that is a really violent movie. And so she asked this director, producer, why he made the movie. And his answer was, because the money was so good. It wasn't a hard movie for me to make, and it was great money. And I think that really goes back to what Ashlyn was just talking about, in the sense of this the value that our decisions have with how we spend money, and then also the decisions that we make on receiving money. So just because he made a lot of money, he put a film out that was really not in the highest and best good for humanity. And I thought that was such an interesting twist and into that story when she was prompted by the women of India, what would you change if you could change something? And then it all tied back to money.
What's that saying? Follow the money. When you want to know the answer, follow the money.
Yeah.
So, I think the core of all this, really, for the soul of money, is really the intent of money. That's really what they're saying. When we go to dinner and we're with a group of, say, girlfriends, what's the intent when we go out to spend that, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks for dinner? Is the intent to connect with each other, to share and get a story? Or is it just to get out of the house and away from the kids? There's always the deepest intent, and that's the soul of where it comes from. Being mindful.
Ashlyn, mine, well, I loved what you said earlier just about the individuality. I think that goes back to kind of this domino concept too. And one of the reasons why it's so powerful to give a little, even if you don't have a lot to give, because you don't know who you're inspiring around you and the domino effect that that's having. Which leads into my favorite story, one of my favorites, which was the one about her being on a fundraising trip or route, and she drops by the office of a really big a high up person in the food industry in Chicago. And she gets a $50,000 check from this man who kind of brushes her off, just writes the check and just wants her to get out of the office. And this particular company had some really bad PR. So she knew that that was the energy that was coming into this money that was given. And then in that same trip or shortly after that, she spoke in Harlem, New York, and she was not speaking to a well-off group of people. And this woman, I think her name was Gertrude, stood up and basically was like, I don't have a lot of money to my name, but I like what you're doing and I want to donate. And that whole group rallied around and donated. And Lynne Twist wrote about how that money, which amounted to probably not even $500, was so much more important and valuable than the $50,000 check, because it came with such good heart and intention that she actually mailed the $50,000 check back to the man with a note that they should consider donating to something that's more meaningful or consider donating at a later time. I thought that was incredible. And to me, like, talk about the soul of money, where you're like, that one was a tough one, because I'm like, well, but the money she could have taken and really given to the fundraiser. But going off of that whole energy of money, I thought that was really cool and spoke volumes about considering the soul and energy behind money. And sure enough, years later, that man ended up actually donating from his own pocket because of the impact that she made. And then obviously probably left a lasting impact on his life too, which I thought was a really cool story.
The women in India was my top story, but since the three of us felt that way, another one that I really enjoyed was the story about the Magnificent Seven out of Bangladesh. And I loved it because the story she told, meeting with the one gentleman, was they did an activity where they closed their eyes and they envisioned this beautiful vision for the future of their community. And from that, all of the people got together and talked about their vision, and they came up with a solution for the poverty in their own village. And together as a community, through that collaboration, we're able to rise above. So I really, really liked that. And the other one that was closer to home was the story of her friend Tracy, who got divorced, and she had been a stay-at-home mom, and she didn't have much through divorce. But due to synchronicities and Tracy's own relationship with money, she was able to find a family. She moved to Japan, somewhere she wanted to live, and created this beautiful opportunity for her own children. And eventually, when she came back to the United States, that just kept that forward momentum, and she built this beautiful career. But I love the synchronicities of moving to Japan and then connecting with this family that she could provide something for that family, and they provided something in return. So both of those were also top for me.
I love that. I love the spirit of collaboration that she spoke on in that story. And one thing I want to go back to briefly about the story you shared of what were they called again? The Seven Masters?
The Magnificent Seven.
The Magnificent Seven was, we always talk about this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Your basics need to be met. Your food, all of this needs to be met before you can self-actualize. But we've said this before on the podcast. What if it's that you actually need to flip this pyramid over and you need to start to self-actualize to get those basic needs met? And that's what they did in that story, is they used visualization, they used energy, they used techniques from this frequency realm that we talk about so commonly to begin to help with some of the basic needs. And I actually had a really interesting conversation, I would say a couple of months ago, with actually a very close friend who was basically telling me that what we were doing was somewhat elitist, and that, there were people starving in the world, and that I should be spending my time and resources on that. And this just felt like, that story just feels like such an affirmation that what we're doing, what we're talking about in these podcasts, it's for everyone. It's not just for this upper echelon. I mean, heck, we're not even the upper echelon. I mean, we're fabulous ladies on here, all of us. But what I'm just trying to say is that these techniques, these things, like, they're accessible to everyone, and that by changing our focus, like her concept of appreciation, right? Appreciate what is around you, and then all of a sudden you actually have enough. Like, that's a mindset shift. You didn't get more money in your bank account. That is a mindset shift, which is something we so often talk about. A perspective shift, a different way of looking at the world. So anyways, I'll get off my passionate horse here because I'm so passionate about this topic. But Jenna, as I said, shared my favorite story about the stock market crash. And instead of spiraling, they turned around and they said, hey, what do we have? Let's appreciate what we have. But the one I will just throw into the mix here is at the end of the book with her mom, and how her mom wrote letters and called people to thank them for all they had contributed to her life. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, like, heartwarming, again, way that no matter who you are, no matter what you have, you can make an impact by sharing with others the impact that they have on you. And she did that also with donating more money and appreciating the exchange of money between the people she was calling, but really just truly loved that energy.
Yeah, I think I even got a few tears in my eyes as I was reading that story at the end of the book. It was really a very sweet story, and what a way to really wrap up one's life with really beauty around her soul and how her soul used what she had there at the very end of her life.
I actually thought of you and I thought of cherry pie, because cherry pie would totally do that, and you would totally do that. And I totally want to do that. I want to be really old and happy, and then I want to spend the last, like, part of my life just, like, giving so much love. But the beautiful thing is we can do that now, right? You don't have to be dying to tell your dry cleaner that, hey, you helping me with this, like, actually has changed my life. Or, hey, thank you for delivering these groceries. Like, you have no idea what that meant to me today. It's never too early to do that.
I have a strange practice, but we just traveled this last weekend. We went to Iowa, and I was in the restroom, and the woman was standing there with her, she was cleaning, and she had her whole thing, and she smiled at me, and I smiled at her, and I said, I just really want to thank you for cleaning this bathroom and keeping it clean, because when we all travel, having a clean restroom is so nice. And it's just one of those jobs that we all take for granted and no one appreciates, but someone actually does that work. And so it's one of my weird little things when I travel. If I see someone who's cleaning the bathroom, I always stop and say, thank you for that. I mean, I don't necessarily say, I know it's an awful job, and maybe they don't think it's an awful job. I hope not. But gosh, I really, really do appreciate that. What you're doing is making my life better. Wow. Well, there were so many great stories in this book. I literally cannot emphasize that. I mean, really, when you guys mentioned in the beginning, like, her worldliness, I mean, literally, she has lived a life that most of us can't even imagine. From interacting with the wealthiest of the wealthy to the poorest of the poor, and having appreciation for all of those people, whether they had a lot of money or they had a little money. And, I really loved at some point in the book, and I don't know where this was, she really talked about, again, there's lessons for all of us, whether you have a little or you have a lot. And jealousy or envy doesn't do anyone any good. It only makes matters worse. And on the flip side, those that have a lot are oftentimes so very unhappy in their lives. Money is not going to buy that happiness for them. So it was a really great point that you made, Ashlyn. I thought about flipping the Maslow's hierarchy of needs on its head and saying this is accessible to everybody. Everybody in the world can take a minute and visualize. Everybody in the world has that capacity. And it's not, this is the other beautiful thing about this book, and we all know this. These people don't want to be poor, but politics, agendas, greed have created situations that have created poverty in most of these situations. Because the reality is there's plenty of food there for them. There's plenty of money to go around, all of that. So it's a real shift in our consciousness as individuals to really start taking action like the women of India and not allowing, we're allowing politics to create poverty. We're allowing greed to create poverty. And I don't know what 5 women can do that are on this podcast to change that, but we have to start talking about it. Just like the women of India had to start talking about the whole situation of infanticide. If we don't have the conversations, we cannot make the change. I really encourage everyone, people, to start having these conversations. Is the poverty that we're seeing really necessary? And how can we change that?
Today, I guess I had a serendipitous moment. I knew we had our book club tonight, but you're busy working and all the yogaing and all the stuff in your busy, busy day. But this morning, my business partner and I, we always have our metaphysical talks in the morning. And we got on a tangent of, how people contribute to fear-based thinking, whether it's a movie you watch or a conversation. And I said, if you had, 10 girlfriends, say, or maybe 5 girlfriends and a couple of neighbors, and they all wanted to do something to rescue, and they're passionate about dogs, but they don't know what to do. I said, what if each of them took $20? Now they might have $100 or $120. I asked my business partner, what can you do with $100? Well, maybe you take that $100 and you invite 10 people and you buy them a cup of coffee that like pets. And now you've got 20 people that want to put in $20. And now you have 200. And we went on and on and on. And I looked at her and I said, you know what we did with $100? We started a business. What can we do? There's plenty we can do with intent and passion. And that's what I got out of this book. And I'm not sure we touched on it, but did anybody at the beginning say she was a professional fundraiser? She had to ask and go to companies and go to individuals and go to functions and ask people for money for causes. That's a lot of people can't even ask for a ride to get them to the airport, let alone ask for a substantial amount of money. I got to give her kudos. She made a shift in a lot of people's lives.
Teresa, this obviously we're talking about overcoming the limitations these last couple of months with your consciousness around money. Mm-hmm. And I really think you sharing your story about your boutique is a powerful story. You alluded to it there just a second ago. You started with $100, but give us a little bit more information on that story because it is a great story.
Oh, well, thank you. Part of it is I had a little boutique in my home with some artists and crafters. We just set it up. It wasn't an investment at all. People brought some things they made. And that turned into, it started getting bigger. And I had 2 friends and I said, do you want to do this, some type of a business boutique? And they said yes. And we each went to the bank with $100 each and opened up a checking account. And from that moment, the 3 intentful energies that came together to have a women's clothing boutique allowed us to energetically reach out. And we went from a living room to 2 spaces in a mercantile in our lovely town to an online store. The impact of how you bring people in and who you meet and what they have to offer, it started with $100. So I always ask, if somebody gave you $100, what would you do? What would you do? It is magical and powerful, and it's energy in motion.
It's really not about the amount you have.
It's what do you do with it? I was at, what is it? Like the dollar store, they're everywhere, right? And I'm walking down the hallway, and there was a little boy. He was 10 with his mother, and he had 10, I could cry right now. He had 10 $1 bills. And with his mom watching, he would go up to different people and say, I have $1 for you. I would like to give it to you. They're in the dollar store, so you can get something for $1. And this little boy, with his little $10, was handing out to 10 different people $1. Intent and energy. It was beautiful.
I love it. So, what are 3 things you learned from this book that you wish you had known earlier in your life? I mean, Teresa, it sounds like you personally obviously have had quite an amazing grasp on that, even from your $100 story. But to everyone, what are the 3 things you wish you learned from this book that you wish you had known earlier in life?
Not to be afraid of money. Love it. Enjoy it. Swim with it. Throw it up in the air. Take a bath with it. It's like you opened a candy jar of your favorite candy. It's no different. Get in there and enjoy it. I wish I would have had that concept at 17, 20, 23, just the freedom of getting in there and letting go with it. Just not being afraid. Not being afraid.
I've wrote down more than 3, but some of them we already talked about. So I'm going to try to do the ones we haven't talked about. But I think things that we haven't talked about yet, one of them going off of what Teresa said is, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, just that money isn't good or bad. I think I have always kind of thought money is bad because of the way people use and abuse it, which is what she talks about all throughout this book. But she talks about redirecting that energy. But there are so many countless stories, like endless stories about how money corrupts people. But it's not that. People allow money to corrupt them, which is a societal thing. And it's the value that we as a collective place on money. But at the end of the day, money is literally a piece of paper. It only has as much value as we assign it. We are willing to give it. We are willing to receive it. Like, the value is subjective in some ways and symbolic in a lot of ways. And I think the other one that was really interesting, and I had never thought about this, but it came from the story from Mother Teresa, where she's meeting with them, and then she describes these 2 people who come in, and they're super rude and obnoxious. They have like symbols of wealth all over them, all of this jewelry, just a ton of wealth, and they're obnoxious and super rude. And they come in, pick up Mother Teresa, snap a picture, basically are like pulling her around to get the picture, leave, don't even say thank you. And the author was so disturbed by that experience and just how disgusting it was in the presence of Mother Teresa, this saint. And then she wrote a letter to her, and Mother Teresa responded that those type of people, if not as much as people who have nothing, need your compassion and empathy, because they're so far down the path of being so wrapped up in the symbolism of wealth that they have miserable lives. And they're in that phase of, greed, envy, more. Everything is about money and what it represents. But those people actually really need your empathy so they can relearn how to allocate their money in a way that better serves them and better serves the world around them. I thought that that was really interesting. And I guess I wouldn't typically have compassion for a person like that who acts in that way, but I thought that was a cool perspective.
I really quickly just want to affirm, you just hit on my other favorite story, and I wish I would have thought of that earlier because I thought that was like one of the biggest mic drop moments of the entire book. So thank you for calling that out.
One of my big ahas out of this book was the conversation toward the end when they were talking about children, their own children, and what kind of legacy they want to leave to their children around money. Not what kind of money do they want to leave, but what kind of thoughts and ways they access money or think about money. And so she talked a lot about ways to spending money in ways that affirm life. So that kind of goes back and forth with what most of you have been saying. And Buckminster Fuller said, remember, your children are your elders in universe time. So they come in after us, but are newly coming in from source. So there are elders in the sense that they've been there for longer. So they really are our teachers. And so I just have to read even deeper into that and kind of make even more sense in that. But that really just made me stop and think differently. And maybe because I work with kids, that really made me think a little bit differently about their role in even the future of money. So I thought that was interesting.
None of those kids come in with lack. We teach them that.
Which that actually ties right into my top 3, which is, what beliefs do you have that are a life sentence? Like this concept that she discussed, that your beliefs can be a life sentence. We know that here at Love Ignites Peace. We work deeply with your subconscious beliefs. But in general, like, your beliefs create your life. So what beliefs do you hold that create a life sentence that actually does not support your highest and best good? Life sentence doesn't sound great. Now, if you are going to have a life sentence of a belief, you might as well make it a freaking good one. So I think that's something that we should all consider. Like, even, those listening, what is a belief that you have about money that really does not support you living your best life in relation to money? Could you perhaps challenge that? Could you perhaps turn the tables and look at it differently in a way that can create a happier, healthier, more thriving relationship with money? So that was one. And that goes again to what you were saying, Mom. It's like, we create those life sentences, we create those beliefs with those children from a young age. So that was one for me. And then another one, and this is just like a straight up call out, because I feel like if we are not being honest with ourselves, like, we can't expect others to be honest with themselves. And I loved her whole part about giving in collaboration and in partnership, not because you're better than the other person. And not that I give thinking, oh my goodness, I'm better than this other person, but I've been a part of a nonprofit here in Colorado for the last 6 years. And this really even shifted my perspective even further, that it's partnership, it's collaboration. They have something amazing and special to offer this world, and we're just partnering and bringing that out, not someone giving because it makes you feel good about yourself, although that's part of your collaboration. And I don't do that to just feel good about myself, but just the importance of seeing people as equals and understanding that there isn't this division of have and have nots. Actually, we all have, we all are, if we look around and appreciate beings with so much to offer. So that was my second one. And then the last one was that something that we have just shared over and over, which is, money carries the power and intention we give it. Endow it with your stand, empower it to change the dream. So we have the power to change the energy of money.
Well, thank you all for those incredible takeaways. I'm just going to add my one takeaway, or I guess the things that I had learned from this book that I wish I would have known when I was so much younger. And I'm always so happy for Ashlyn and Jenna that they're in their 20s. And they're getting an opportunity to read these books and have these conversations at such a young age, because, I didn't know any of that in my 20s. I didn't even start learning any of this until my 40s. So they have a chance to create a really magnificent relationship with money, relationship with themselves, and relationship with life in general as we explore some of these topics. One thing I wish I would have known, and this connects back to that story with Mother Teresa, and I'm not sure exactly where she said it, but she told Lynne in that story after the, nasty people came, that greed and scarcity all grow from the same seed, which is lack. And I thought that was so profound. We never think of greed growing from the seed of lack. But when I heard that, or when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. A greedy person is only afraid they're not going to have enough. Okay, well, let's move on. How would you all rate the book?
A 10.
We only go to 5 on this scale.
Then I would give it a hard, solid, bold, big 5.
I second that.
I'm going to give this one a 4. I loved it. I loved the author. I know. Here's the thing. I have to, when I give my ratings, I have to compare it to, if I was giving it in a vacuum, I think it's great. But the other books that I gave a 5, I think I just loved so much more. So I'm doing it in comparison to how I've rated other books. I absolutely loved this author. You can tell she's a sweetheart. I want to see if she has other things. I want to go find her on the internet. I feel so inspired by her. I love her story, and I love what it stands for. The message and takeaways are a 5. As a book, there were some parts that were really slow for me that I was like really feeling like I wanted to skip over. So that's where the 4 comes from.
I respect it. I actually am a 4.5 because I thought that this is a beautiful book, so well written, so many good takeaways, but I did have a few lulls in the book. I will say I also thought it was really beautifully written. I thought it was done really well. So I'm a 4.5.
Well, I'm going to go with a 5. So we have the, our generation here is going with a 5. The younger generation is going with 4 to 4.5 for this one.
This leads us at an average of 4.7. So still pretty darn good and would highly recommend.
One of our best.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, so I'm going to read a quick quote from the book, and then we'll close up this podcast with what we're reading for our next book club book. So from the book, this was on page 194, money becomes a conduit, a way to express our highest ideas. Money becomes the currency of love and commitment, expressing the best of who you are, rather than a currency of consumption driven by emptiness and lack and allure of external messages. So let's take that energy of money with the idea of how it can generate love and commitment in our lives and in our world out in the coming weeks that we have in front of us. So our next book, we're going to continue this topic of overcoming limitations in our relationship with money, is Love Money, Money Loves You by Sarah McCrum. And a couple of us have already read this book. I cannot recommend it enough. I'm actually on my second reading.
I'm really excited for the conversation because I've loved Love Money, Money Loves You, but it does take this idea of money and does put it a little bit in this category of you can have as much of it as you want. So not that it's completely in juxtaposition. I actually think the books go together beautifully, but we can talk about that on the next podcast. I'm just excited for everyone else's thoughts and feedback as we discuss next month.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful podcast crew here. I love you all. And as always, I'm sending love from my heart to yours.
And get your freak on. Remember, you are the ignition. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.